You leave everything to your spouse, but one side of your family could inherit less. Your matching wills haven't settled who controls that decision. Your shared intention may be clear, the survivor remains financially secure, and whatever is left eventually passes to children from both previous relationships. The uncertainty sits inside the words, whatever is left. After the first death, your children may be relying on a future decision they'll have no part in. You're both deciding now. Later, only the survivor is deciding, and the names at the end of the plan may still be editable, may be changed. You're trying to secure two things at once: the freedom your spouse needs as survivor, and the destination you want for both branches of your blended family. Protecting your spouse first is entirely reasonable. They may need the home, investment income, or capital for care or repairs or even a move. You can't know exactly what their life will require later, but you've also agreed that children from both previous relationships should benefit once the survivor no longer needs the assets. On the face of it, matching wills seem to achieve both aims. Each will says the survivor inherits first. Each also names the children who should inherit later. The clauses may be almost identical, but the children usually aren't receiving their intended shares at that first stage. They're waiting to see what remains in the survivor's estate. Whatever remains. That may be substantially different from the property and savings you have now. The survivor may spend capital, sell the family home, and buy somewhere else, help a child financially, form a new relationship, or replace their will as circumstances change. That freedom may be essential. They may need to move, release capital, or pay for care, but unlimited freedom and a fixed destination aren't the same instruction. Your matching wills may express both intentions. The legal structure decides which one takes priority for each asset. Take wording often used in an ordinary will. I give my estate to my spouse, absolutely. If my spouse fails to survive me, I give my estate to the children in equal shares. The important word is absolutely. It normally means your spouse isn't simply receiving use of the assets for a limited period. They're receiving them as their own, subject to the precise wording and how each asset passes. The children named in the second part may inherit under that will only if your spouse dies first. If your spouse survives and takes the estate outright, that second gift may never apply to those assets. Ordinary mirror wills are basically separate wills. They're often prepared together with matching terms, but each of you generally retains the ability to revoke or replace your own will. I read the will alongside the way each asset passes. Identical clauses alone can't establish whether the home reaches the survivor outright or remains subject to restrictions. Mirror wills record two shared intentions, but they don't by themselves prevent a survivor who receives assets outright from redirecting them later. Once an asset belongs outright to the survivor, they can usually make a new will, use the money for living costs, sell and reinvest assets, change how property and accounts are held, or make gifts. The home makes this especially important. If you own it as joint tenants, your share will usually pass automatically to the survivor through the right of survivorship. It doesn't pass under the gift in your will. If you own it as tenants in common, your respective share can pass under your will. That may allow it to be treated differently, including through an appropriately drafted trust. The title to your home affects what your will can achieve. Other assets may take their own route. Pension, death benefits, life policies, and nominated accounts may be dealt with under scheme rules, a nomination, or a trust arrangement. An asset can form part of your family plan without passing under your will. There's also an important distinction between ordinary mirror wills and mutual wills. A mutual will arrangement may, in some circumstances, involve an agreement intended to bind both of you and restrict later changes. Matching terms alone don't establish that agreement. Mutual wills tend to be a bit outdated and not normally or usually used in this current time. The wording, your intentions, your communications, and that available evidence can all matter. Those arrangements are legally complex and need special assessment. You shouldn't assume you have mutual wills simply because they look alike or were signed at the same appointment. Trust-based planning takes a different approach. Instead of giving an asset to the survivor absolutely, an appropriately drafted will may place all or part of it into trust. The survivor can then have defined rights while the trust terms governs where the asset passes after their death. For the home, those rights might include remaining in the property, moving to a replacement home, or receiving income dependent on the drafting. Trustees may have responsibilities, powers, and limits that shape how the arrangement works. That can give the intended destination greater protection, but it may also bring administration, tax considerations, and limits on what the survivor can do. A right of occupation can protect the survivor's housing without transferring the entire property outright. But if it's drafted too narrowly, it may cause difficulty when the survivor needs to downsize, relocate, or meet changing care needs. Different assets may need different treatment. Your home doesn't have to follow the same design as cash, investments, pensions, or other personal possessions. Place each significant asset on a line. At one end is maximum freedom for the survivor, other is a more protected destination for the children. An outright inheritance sits closer to the freedom end. Your spouse has broad access and can respond as life changes, but the children's eventual inheritance depends more heavily on what remains. A trust, occupation right, or tailored ownership arrangement may sit further towards protection. It can define how an asset may be used and where it should pass, but it may mean less freedom for the surviving spouse and more administration. You don't have to make one choice for your whole estate. You can start with your home, decide what your spouse genuinely needs from it, whether it's a secure right to live there, the ability to sell and buy another property, or access to capital, or a combination of all those rights. Full ownership can provide those things, but it isn't the only option. Now apply the same thinking to savings and investments. Money needed for your spouse's daily life may require broad access. A defined family share intended for children from an earlier relationship may need firmer limits. Include pensions, life policies, and jointly held assets. Their nomination, scheme rules, and titles need to support the plan rather than quietly send an asset down a different path. Give your spouse enough access to remain secure and respond to genuine change. And decide which intended inheritances shouldn't rely solely on the survivor preserving today's matching plan. Ask a specialist to model survivor freedom against protected destination.